everybody and welcome back to my channel. So it's part 2 of my Sapporo coat sew along, and I'm back in the studio and my coat is ready to go on the table. So the first thing I'm going to do is attach that second sleeve, and I'm just going to do it in exactly the same way as I did before. So I've only just pinned it. I'm going to sew it on my machine again with the 1 centimeter seam allowance, not the 1.5, because I like the length of the sleeves on my other coats. And then we will talk about the next step. Okay, so I know I always say this, but the scaffolding is going up today, so there might be some background noise, but I'm hoping, like usual, and like a few of you have told me, that you can't actually hear it because of my microphone being so close to me. But if you do hear banging and stuff and drilling, then I'm really sorry, but they are literally outside the window. Right, so I'm on step 8 in the little instruction booklet now. So it says stitch fused neck facing to front neck edge with the right sides together. Pull the facing around the neckline and stitch to the other end of the opposite front neck edge. Press seams open. So from the diagram you can see that the right side of the coat is facing out and the neck is sort of going across and attaching to that diagonal piece, and the stitching is down this way. So that might look confusing to some of you, but if you have your coat facing right side up, this is the neck facing here. So I'm going to lay that over that section there, which is the centre. Now these two flappy bits either side are what's going to attach to these. So it may look confusing to start with, but if you lay that neck facing over the centre back seams, you can see that you've got your your middle panel going all the way down and then your shoulder pieces on the back. Then suddenly, once you fold these bits back, it should make sense that you just bring those together and attach those two like that. So that's what I'm going to do now. Oh, there's the drilling, I hope you can't hear it. So I'm going to attach these sides just like that, with the usual 1 centimeter seam allowance, because this is going to be fixed differently. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, so I've joined both those seams there and pressed them open. So this is what you're left with, and then suddenly it all starts to make sense because this fits perfectly along there once the interfacing is on the inside. So see where the interfacing ends there? If you fold that back, then it suddenly makes sense that that's going to fit to that. So, sorry, I'm not really showing you very clearly. Can you see that? So once that's folded, it perfectly lines up to that folded edge there. So all the interfacing is on the inside then. So, step 9. Fold back the centre front along the fused edge, starting and ending at the notches, with the right sides together and wrap facing around the neckline. Stitch all the way around the top edge of the neckline, trim the seam allowance back to about 5 millimeters, clip seam allowance and corners and press seam allowance towards the facing, and understitch. So that's quite a lot of information, but so what we're going to do is pin this neckline to our coat, and then as you can see from the diagram, the red stitching is all the way around the neck, so that's easy. So I'm going to stitch that line as normal with my 10mm seam allowance, and then I will go through the next step with you because that's quite a lot of information in one go. Just one thing to add now that I've pinned it, if you have the coat like this right side out so that it looks neat, and then you fold this bit back, that should help you see it a lot clearer. Also, this seam here on the neck facing should line up with this seam here on the shoulder of your coat, and the same on the other side. And then just make sure that when you sew, all these seams will be sewn open, just to keep it nice and flat. Okay, so I've sewn this whole neck piece now, so it should look like this. Now, as per the instructions, you need to trim down the seam allowance to half. So all you're going to do is cut all the way along this, and trim it down. Okay, so that's nice and neat now. So now all you need to do is clip into the curves. So just to help it sit flat, You've all probably done it before, but wherever there's a large amount of curve, you just need to cut little triangles. So a small pair of scissors would be really, really useful here. But you just need to cut a series of small triangles all the way along to try and help the neckline sit better, because as it curves round, those join together like that, so there's space, so you won't get any puckering or buckling under the neck facing. One thing to add here is that you never ever want to cut well, you want it close to the stitching, but never ever cut into the stitching, otherwise you're going to have to sew it all again. Okay, so once you've clipped into your curves, the next step is to press the facing, press the seams towards the facing and then understitch. So what you're going to do with your iron is press all the bulk towards the facing, so everything this way, so that on the inside, this seam here should lie directly underneath your facing. And then to understitch, all you need to do is, once that's pressed, you just need to stitch this seam to the facing. So your stitching, if I flip it around the other way, should just sit a few millimeters away from that seam line. So it'll be on the inside of the coat, but it just means that it will mean that this facing will always be rolled under on the inside, so you should never ever see it from the outside. Okay, so once you've understitched, it should look something like this. So you can see the line of the seam, and then just underneath it is another line of stitching on the facing. I can never quite get it to the corner because of the angles of my sewing machine, but the majority of it does sit nicely underneath, so it should look like that from the front. So next we're going to make the lining pieces up. Okay, so lining pieces. So if we go to step 10, you can see that we've got the main folded piece on the back, and then they just want you to join the shoulders exactly like we did at the start. And remember, I'm sorry about the patterns on here because it might be quite difficult to see. So this is my shoulder pieces, and it's right sides together on top of my back piece that was cut on the fold, and you just need to remember that, like the other piece, this curve needs to go all the way around to there, so you need to manipulate this all the way around to fit on the end there. So that's just one thing to note again, is to carefully pin those together, but you're just going to sew this all the way down from the neck piece to this corner piece under the arm, and then repeat it exactly on the other side with the mirrored image. I'm going to be sewing this at my 15mm seam allowance because that's what the main coat pieces were sewn on with, so I'm going to do that, but you're going to do usual 10mm seam allowance. So I'm just going to sew this piece and then pin the other one and then sew the other one. Okay, so I've attached both of the shoulder pieces to the back in the lining. And then I've pressed the seams away towards the arms, like the rest of the coat. So now all I need to do is lay the two front parts over each side. So one's going to go that side, and then this one is going to go that side. And then all I need to do is sew the shoulder pieces, leave the arms open, and then sew the sides down, just like the diagram. So it's relatively easy and clear. All you've got to do, if you will focus, is shoulders, sides, and I just need to remember, I'm going to mark it with pins, that in this right hand side I'm going to have to leave a gap so that I can turn the coat inside out once I've finished. So all my lining pieces are joined now at the shoulders and the sides, and I have just pressed all the seams. Well, the shoulder seams are all pressed to the back of the coat, back of the lining, sorry, and the side seams are also pressed to the back. So now I'm just on step 12. So if you turn your coat the right way around and just lay it on your table, you can then slip over your lining so that the right sides are together. And all you need to do is sew around this top edge around the neck, joining these sides together, including the neck. But at the bottom, where this joins up to here, you just need to leave a little gap of 1 centimetre on each side, so that when you do the next bit and you do the corners, it makes your life a bit easier. So I'm just going to pin the whole neck all the way around, and then sew from this edge, leaving 1 centimetre, all the way to the other edge, leaving 1 centimetre again at the bottom of this side, and then we can move on to step 13. If, like me, sometimes you forget to stop when you get carried away with your sewing, just put 2 pins side by side where you need to remind yourself to stop, and that should give you a little cue to make sure you stop where you need to. Okay, so once you've sewn your lining around the neck, you should be left with an inside out coat, something like this. So this is where we joined, but when you pull that away to where it needs to be, this should be on the fold basically. So once you've done that bit, you just need to slide it up so that you can now do the bottom edge. So all you need to do here is sew all the way around the bottom edge, joining this lining again to the bottom. Now you'll notice how there's a big baggy bit here, but that's so that you can do the tapered corners afterwards. So just join this edge, this straight edge here, to the lining straight edge along the bottom. But I'd recommend you go around and do the notches lining up and the seams lining up first, and then fill it in between, because sometimes when you cut it, there's a slight variation in size. So do the notches and the seams first, and then pin in between and see where you need to make adjustments. Okay, so once you've got that pinned, again put a couple of pins in either end where the point is, because you need to remember to stop 1 centimetre from the edge. My lining doesn't line up exactly, which is why I pinned it the way I did, because I've changed the seam allowance as I go along, but I'll be able to hide that inside. So yours should match up perfectly compared to mine. So we're just going to sew this all the way around again from one end to the other, remembering to stop 1 centimetre before the end, and then we can do the corners. So once you've done that bottom edge, if you just lay it out flat, you should be able to see what you need to do next with these bottom corners. So you basically just need to bring them together and then sew up that line, so you're almost like joining the previous stitching and then just going to the edge, and you do that on both sides. I'm just gonna taper my extra lining in there so that on my overlocker I also just cut that off. So you basically bring them together neatly so that this bit's sort of folded, so you're bringing this sewn edge and this sewn edge flat together, and then you can see that you just sew all the way down there, as you did before, and then you can turn it all the way around through that gap in your lining. Okay, so here's my finished coat with the lining inside. So now we just need to finish it off. So what you do is pull your sleeve through the other side so that you can see the lining, and you just need to fold this under and then hand stitch it to the stitch line of your previous sewing on the sleeves. So you're basically just covering that up. So you fold this under by 1 centimetre, or however much your seam allowance was. Mine on the sleeves was 1 centimetre, and you're just going to pin it all the way around just on the line of those stitches, and then you're going to hand tack it all the way around. Okay, so one thing to remember is to always try and line up the seams under the arms and on the shoulders with the same seams on your coat, just for neatness. And obviously I did mine, I just folded it under by 1 centimetre, but if you wanted to, you could press it first to make that a bit easier. And now we're just going to hand sew it gently all the way around, and I'm going to show you how I do this. Okay, so I have my needle and thread here, and I've just doubled it over, so I've put it through and then tied both of the ends together just so that it's a bit thicker and stronger. So the way I do this is, if I start under the arm, I just quickly hide my knot by poking it through from the back so that the knot's inside. Now I'm going to do a ladder stitch because I find that's the most invisible and the easiest stitch and the strongest stitch for something like this. So once you've come up through the lining side here with your knot, you then poke it back through in the exact same line into the coat. So I'm just going to carefully put that onto the sewing line of the previous stitching, and then you come up in the same line, pull through, and then now that you're a bit further up, you then put it in the same place in the lining side, in the exact opposite place, and then do a stitch up. And a great way to remember this is, because it's called ladder stitching, you're basically making a ladder. So this is one side of the ladder and the black is the other side of the ladder, and you're stitching the steps across. So you go up, across this way, up, across this way, up, across this way, up, across this way, all the way up. Obviously a lot smaller than that, but it just means that you get a really, really strong stitch, and you won't be able to see any of the stitches that you do because they'll all be invisible. And also remember, you're only sewing through the inside part of the sleeve, and you're attaching the lining to that, so you don't want any stitching coming through on the right side of the sleeve. So just keep checking that you're not putting it through this side. So that's another reason why I chose white threads, because if I make any mistakes, I'll be able to tell. So I'm just going to keep sewing all the way around my sleeve, and then I've got to repeat this on the other one. So this may take a bit of time, so I think I might go and make a cup of tea before I finish this. Okay, so I've done all my hand stitching on my sleeves, and I did it on the lining with the same ladder stitching all over. Took a few hours, so I have drunk a tea, had my lunch and everything else. But yeah, I finished it. The only additional thing I did do is this seam here from the front that goes into the pocket. I just ditch stitched the first like couple inches there so that I can hold this lining piece in place, because I find that because there's no understitching or anything in the lining, it does tend to roll out sometimes if it isn't pressed well. So I just did that in addition, just to like keep the lining where it is. But no, I'm really, really happy with it. I love the colour of this new one. I think I'm going to wear it a lot. I'm going to take some full-length photos of it for my blog soon. So once I've got my blog post up with new pictures, I'm really sorry if you can hear all that banging. They're probably listening to me because they're just outside the window. Anyway, I really hope you like it. I'm really, really happy with the lining. Yeah, so once I get some full length pictures, I'll put them up on my blog, and then I'll put it in the description. It won't be for a few days, but that's fine. But no, I'm really, really happy with it. I hope you enjoyed this sew along, and I hope it helped you sew your own Sapporo coats. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you later on in the week for another video. Happy handmade, everyone!